The federal government has gazetted 21 new regulations for Nigeria's oil and gas upstream sector in a sweeping move to unlock investments, streamline operations, and align industry practices with both national and global priorities. This was disclosed by the Chief Executive of the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission in APRC, Gbenga Komolafe. According to him, the new regulatory frameworks developed under the Petroleum Industry Act 2021 are designed to offer clarity, attract capital, and promote accountability across exploration and production operations. Joining me to unpack this, I have Temitope Kolade, Associate Director, Oil, Gas and Power, Andersen Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kolade.
Thanks, Dr. for having me. Good morning.
Good morning to you too. Well, 21 is no child's play. Now, let us get into these regulations and the ones that sort of stand out to you.
Yeah, well, 21 new regulations is not a joke. I think that, number one, we should realize how many months of reviews would have gone into that. And importantly, like a sector-wide reset for the oil and gas industry, especially the upstream sector. And if I'm to speak to the ones that stand out, we'll be happy with the one, particularly with respect to upstream petroleum measurement regulations. When you think about how unpredictable it's been over the years, trying to even see how much production is going on, the reporting.
Mr. Kolade, I'm afraid, I guess the network is really not so good or favorable at this time. But if you can hear me, I would like you to please go ahead. I mean, you're talking about how that it's important to look at, the amount of time and work that got into all of this before we got to where we are, and how this is, of course, also helping production. If you can hear me, please go ahead. You can continue from where you stopped, Mr. Kolade.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I was speaking to the fact that if you're looking at the ones that stand out, and the fact that, of course, this is more like a sector-wide reset sort of regulations that we're seeing. I spoke to the upstream measurement, petroleum measurement regulations in particular, and the fact that over the years, the output figures were quite. And the introduction of this regulation means that operators now need to provide some certified metering systems and technology-driven monitoring. And this is being made mandatory, more or less. Means is that there should be some level of trust. I mean, investor trust that will be brought back into the system. And again, there is also the host community regulations that is also very important. Again, the idea is to provide some sort of social license where these upstream operators are carrying on their business. And more importantly for me, when it comes to issues around sustainability and, of course, climate change, you look at the gas flaring, venting, methane emissions regulations. And for me, I think that's a critical step to ensuring that decarbonization is achieved, and we begin to do specific things with respect to the goal of Nigeria with respect to reducing carbon footprints.
All right, you've talked about 2 of the regulations so far, even 3, and I think the third one you mentioned is the one about the Host Community Development Order. I want us to talk about this because it mandates the creation of a Host Communities Development Trust. I mean, my concern about this would be whether or not you're concerned about the management of, these funds and project implementation, because when you talk about a trust, that means some money will be going into a particular place.
Yeah, I mean, the trust in itself is revolutionary when you think about the idea, right? And the idea is, again, to place some dedicated development funds in the hands of the host community. But again, like you've raised, there is the concern around, the issue of governance. One of the bigger issues that we've had in Nigeria in the last couple of years has to do with weak governance. I'm sure that some of us will still remember the story of how some persons were being interviewed by the Senate with respect to the NDDC funds and the sort of popular lines that have emerged from such conversations, right? So indeed, that concern is still there. The issues around political interference, the issues around lack of transparency. And so for it to really work very well, we need clear governance frameworks, and not just on paper, but working governance frameworks, independence audits, and of course, the need to ensure that the community participates bottom ground, bottom up, and top-to-bottom approach in terms of the implementation of these regulations.
Right. There is this other one I'd like you to speak on before we then, start talking generally about the industry. Could you speak to us about your expectations and concerns regarding whether it's domestic gas delivery obligation regulations and, of course, the upstream petroleum safety regulations, or maybe you also want to look at the decommissioning and abandonment regulations? I know you've mentioned some, but I just want us to look at these three specifically, or you can choose any of them to talk about.
Okay, well, if you look at the safety regulations, it addresses some very urgent need to ensure prevention of accidents, environmental incidents also. And you know how much that could erode public trust, and what we've had with respect to the Ogoni land cleanup and the conversations that have happened with respect to that. Those issues in the last couple of years in Nigeria. So the decommissioning and abandonment regulations also aligns with that in some ways to ensure that operators will begin to set aside funds. And I think it's very revolutionary if you think about it, that it's not just going forward, you create some sort of funding or provisioning that is not backed by funds. The expectation is that going forward, for you to even take those funds as deductible in your tax computations for companies that have to pay tax, you would have to show that there is an account that is being funded. So it's not a case that, we just think about something and we have on paper provided for something, but you've got to, based on what the Petroleum Industry Act also says, that you should actually create a specific account that you're crediting a certain amount for. And maybe one other one that is also very important to discuss is the one that has to do with the domestic gas delivery obligations. I think it's one chance for Nigeria to tackle the paradox that we've been faced with: abundant gas resources, and this, at the same time, we're having energy poverty, right? The point here is that going forward, we should begin to see some matching investment in gas processing. And of course, if you then look at the one with respect to the decarbonization, also it aligns with that to ensure that we begin to see investment with respect to gas gathering, gas processing, and utilization in Nigeria.
Right. Well, there is this particular one because I was at an event recently and players in the sector were sort of complaining about it, and that's the cost-effective order. Now, according to them, the cost of operation is high in Nigeria and, adding some other things, layers of issues to be dealt with, whether it's security or regulatory fees and levies. You also want to look at the Trump effect. And for them, they were warning that concentrating too much on cost effectiveness when challenges abound may not augur well. What do you make of this?
Oh, well, thank you very much for that question. I think to start with, the reservations that were made at that event are founded, right? Think about it this way, that the fundamental cost of the inflated operating cost within the upstream sector in Nigeria are not because of inefficiencies, but they are structural in nature. They are coming from issues around pipeline vandalism, for instance, the high security costs, multiple levies also that they've raised as issues. So the cost efficiency order is trying to streamline operations, but if we just go ahead and implement it in a blunt manner, it could push companies to begin to cut corners with respect to safety and innovation. And we've talked about the regulations that has to do with safety, for instance. So there has to be like an handshake between knowing what the fundamental issues are and not necessarily raising points with respect to inefficiency. What exactly is inefficiency if we have fundamental issues, structural issues that have to do with security and all of that. But that notwithstanding, I think it's also important to celebrate that sort of push. But again, one of the fundamental thing that I have against that is the fact that it seems to put a cap on how much you can also take with respect to the reliefs that you get as a result of the efficiency that you're pushing. So it's really important to see how this would play out and for the regulators to respond very quickly to ensure that it's really achieving its purpose and it's not just one of those documents that would sit in the shelves as one of the government policies that is trying to achieve something that wouldn't be actualized in the long run.
Well, I must say that industry players are sort of, quite optimistic about a couple of things, irrespective of, some of the challenges or some of the things they have highlighted. And then we're seeing more local participation in the upstream sector. We have more rig counts, we're having improved investor confidence and the like. What are your suggestions for sustaining this momentum?
Well, you talked about optimism, but we must also agree that optimism is some very fragile assets, and so it's got to be very well nurtured. Data tells the story of these rig counts that are jumping up from, say, 8 in 2021 to about 46 as of July 2025, based on what the NUPRC itself is reporting, and that sort of reflects the renewed investor confidence in the sector in Nigeria. So what do we need? We need better security in this producing areas. We need faster project approvals to sustain that momentum and ensure that, of course, there is some sort of policy consistency and whatever bureaucratic processes that we have got to deal with those to bolster indigenous operator capacity. And of course, critical infrastructure must be kept safe to ensure that we have operators and investors' confidence sustained.
Right. Very quickly, before we continue, I mean, I remember the story this morning talking about India getting crude oil from Nigeria, and that's happening while, on the other hand, we have local, refiners complaining, saying they are not getting enough, whether it's Dangote refinery or even the other modular refiners or, the other refiners. I would like you to speak to this. What exactly is the issue? Is this something to be excited about because we need to earn foreign exchange while we're doing naira for crude, locally? What's your take on this?
Well, my take is that the conversations that are being held in that regards are largely commercial, and to a very large extent, you will know that if you look at the state oil company, for instance, over the years, they've been taking some forward contracts, and that is to say that there is a lot of leverage on the production, and not just current production, but future production with respect to what we expect from the NNPCL. What does that tell us? That we may not necessarily expect that sort of balance between what we have today and what we would expect in terms of the production or the refining that is happening within Nigeria. So export imports, I think largely what should be the focus of everyone is that balance to ensure that on the one hand we are getting those foreign exchange earnings in Nigeria, but at the other end we're able to also meet some domestic obligations. But again, to achieve that in an ideal manner, it would mean that we've got to ramp up production to a very great level, where it's not a case that we just have to meet local needs and then we are not earning foreign currencies. And of course, if we have obligations based on previous contracts, we will not also renege on those contracts. So it's really striking a balance that really matters.
Right. So what would be a fair production level for you, considering, some of these issues that you have highlighted, and also looking at maybe the global oil issues, the volatility we're seeing in, oil prices and all of those? How will Nigeria, offset some of these risks?
Okay, well, if you think about it, we'll have to get data from OPEC, and of course, we'll look at the quota system. Currently, we are just at about 1.5 million barrels per day, as expected from OPEC. We've not necessarily been meeting the numbers, and the time passed. There was a time when they were also expecting us to produce as much as 1.8 million, right? The government has said, okay, at some point we think that we would get to 2 million. So when we put all the numbers together, I think it's also important to balance it with the conversations we've had earlier with respect to what exactly are obligations with respect to those forward contracts that we've signed onto as it were today, and what's the production need within Nigeria domestically. And so I would think that we also don't want to get to a surplus where it comes to a point where nobody is willing to buy. So those balances are always very delicate, sort of. But I would think to start with, we might just want to achieve the same numbers that the government has been trying to achieve in the last couple of years and know where we go from there. And that would be around 2 million barrels per day. I guess that would be a starting point to then begin to have further conversations on how much more we can produce and what market is available to offtake whatever production figures that we're meeting in Nigeria.
All right, thank you so much, Temitope Kolade, Associate Director, Oil, Gas and Power, Andersen Nigeria. I hope to have this conversation with you some other time. Thank you for your time.